Can you understand me? I looked up at him, the silver stiletto blade still hidden securely against my thigh beneath the blanket he had draped over me. I nodded slowly. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear everything. Bata let out a long, relieved sigh, but the tension in his shoulders didn't fade. He reached over, pretending to adjust the medical monitor next to my bed. Good. Then listen to me carefully. Warlord Van is returning to this room in 5 minutes to take you to his personal quarters. I did everything I could to delay the procedure, but I have run out of time. He looked toward the locked titanium doors, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. If you have people coming for you, they need to break into this ship right now. The titanium blast doors open with a heavy, pressurized thud. I stiffened against the lab table, my hand instinctively tightening around the damp cloth Bata had given me as Warlord Van strode into the room. Without his heavy outer chest armor, he was still a towering, imposing figure, but his posture was tense, his pale eyes burning with a controlled fury. He didn't look at Bata. He locked his gaze directly onto me. "Data Probleme met Opskytingsplatformen," Van grumbled, his voice low and gravelly. Before my mind could even process the alien syllables, the linguistic lattice behind my ear stitched the words together into a perfect English translation in my head. "There are problems with the launch pad." Bata stepped forward, opening his mouth to speak, but I was already a step ahead of him. I kept my face perfectly blank, staring at Van as if I couldn't understand a single thing. The translator cleared his throat. "The Warlord states that he intended to take you back to his home. However, there has been an unexpected malfunction with the dispatch portion of the launch pad." Van barked another sharp sentence, pacing toward the metal tray of surgical instruments. "Desierde vil tatu eller 3 dager a reparere. Noen sabotera drivstofflinjene." They say it will take 2 or 3 days to repair, my mind translated instantly. Someone is sabotaging the fuel lines. A quiet thrill shot through my chest. Ralph and the team were doing it. They were hitting the infrastructure from the shadows, delaying the ship's departure, and buying us precious time. Bata translated faithfully, keeping his voice smooth. "The repairs to the dispatch deck will take approximately 2 to 3 days. We are confined to the mines until it is resolved." Van stopped pacing and turned back to face me. The anger on his face smoothed out, replaced by that chilling, aristocratic arrogance that Clison culture is known for. He looked me up and down, giving a slow, satisfied nod to Bata, clearly pleased that the procedure was finished. "Bli med mig to lunch, kvinna," Van said, his tone shifting from a command to a bizarrely formal invitation. "Join me for lunch, woman." He didn't wait for the translator to repeat the words. Van turned on his heel and walked out of the laboratory, his personal guards falling into steps behind him. The blast doors remained open, a clear indication that I was expected to follow. The translator looked at me, a subtle warning glinted in his eyes. "The Warlord requests that you join him for lunch, Ruth. It is best not to keep him waiting." After receiving the warning from Bata, I slowly slid off the medical table, my legs a little shaky from the lingering sedative, but the silver stiletto blade pressed reassuringly against my thigh. I had 2 to 3 days on solid ground, a working translator in my head, and a lunch date with a warlord. It was time to find out exactly what he wanted with me. I followed them, walking slowly. Once I arrived at the corridor, I peeped in. His 2 guards stood tall outside the double doors, and I remained standing next to them as Van proceeded to walk inside, unlatching and removing his long red cloak. The room was stunning, surrounded by massive viewports that let in a flood of natural lighting. Through the glass, I could see the rugged cliffs of Clison stretching out below, and the moon hanging heavily in the sky. It was beautiful, but also terrifying. In the middle of the room, there was a luxury lounge area on the floor, with an array of food sitting on a low carved table. Van sat down on a plush cushion and immediately began pouring himself a drink. "Come, Ruth, join me for a meal," he commanded. I wasn't ready to eat. The last time I ate something in this place, I ended up flat on a lab table with fresh stitches hidden behind my left ear. However, in this situation, I knew I didn't have a choice. I walked slowly into the room, observing my surroundings like a caged animal. As soon as my feet crossed the threshold, the heavy doors shut behind me. Making my way to the sitting area, a cold dread sank into my stomach as I noticed the layout. This was Van's personal quarters, and his private bedroom was directly attached. The food presented here was completely different from what I was served before. There were vibrant fruits, unfamiliar vegetables, and funny-looking bird-like animals roasted. Not wanting to be rude or provoke him, I sat and began to eat. Van must have been starving. He basically devoured an entire roasted animal on his own, tearing into it without care. Unlike the guards, Van wasn't just tall. He was heavily muscular and noticeably much older. He looked like he was in his late 60s, his weathered skin mapped with deep, jagged scars. I assumed they were trophies from the endless wars he had survived. I must have been staring too hard, because he suddenly snapped his head up. "What are you looking at, woman?" he asked in that harsh, gravelly tone. "Oh, sorry. I just noticed that you have a lot of scars," I stammered, quickly turning my head to focus on chewing my food. "I have fought in many wars, too many to count," he said roughly, tossing a bone he had been sucking on onto the table with a dull thud. "My family name is Xialu Sint. We have been warriors for generations, all the way back before Laxton Disjin Lao Moon became the supreme leader. My ancestor, Marol Xialu Sint, was second in command of Nergui. The Great War that originally united the Krigere sect was fought between Nergi and Lao Moon." He paused, taking a massive gulp of a strange blue drink. "Has your family always been at war with the Lao Moons?" I asked, trying to keep him talking. "I believe so. My father and his father believed that Nergi was the rightful leader of our people. My family was determined to see his bloodline back where it belongs. But with war comes death." His harsh voice softened slightly, a sudden shadow of grief crossing his face. "Over the years, Nergui's last male heir was killed at the Slaget Vedsteinene, the Battle of the Rocks. My own father and brother died when we attacked the Lao Moon camps. Now, I am the warlord," he said sadly, staring into his cup. "Without an heir of my own, my throne will simply pass on to my second-in-command's bloodline when I fall. All that death for nothing." I wasn't sure if I should feel sorry for this killer or not. I had heard Trogon's side of the story, and at this moment I was still firmly rooting for the displaced prince. Plus, I just wanted to go home. If it wasn't for Van's twisted mind slavery operation, I wouldn't even be on this planet. Heck, under normal circumstances, maybe Ralph and I would have met on some dating app back on Earth instead of a rebel prison camp. Van continued talking into the late evening. I did the only thing I could do, pretend that I was listening. However, before we could finish our conversation, the doors hissed open. One of the servants entered, carefully carrying a glass filled with a familiar dark red liquid. "Lord Van, this drink is from the healer, meant for the woman." The servant bowed low. He said she might enjoy it, since it reminds her of her home. "May I place it on the table?" Van motioned with a lazy wave of his hand, and the servant placed the glass directly in front of me before bowing out. I, on the other hand, had absolutely no desire to drink what I assumed was another roofie. As I sat there contemplating whether to even touch it, Van rose from his cushion and walked into the adjoining bedroom. The moment he was out of sight, I noticed a tiny, crumpled note resting on the silver platter beneath the glass. It simply read, "Please." I wasn't sure if I should trust the healer, but so far, Bartar had been the only one showing me any kindness. Before I could make a final decision, a deep movement caught my eye. I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. Van was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, completely unclothed. In a sickening flash, I realized exactly why the doctor had sent the drink. Bartar knew what Van was going to do to me. He was trying to protect my mind from the horror of what was coming. Panicking, I grabbed the glass and drank the red juice as fast as I could, gulping it down. Van let out a loud, mocking laugh from the doorway. "You think being drunk will make this easier for you?" At that exact moment, a switch flipped inside me. I wasn't going to let this happen. I wasn't going to just lie down. Reaching beneath the hem of my gown, I ripped the silver stiletto blade from the holster on my thigh, bolted over the low table, and charged straight at him. But he was too fast and too strong. The second I reached him, his massive hand clamped around my wrist like an iron vice. He squeezed tightly, so tight the bones in my arm groaned, and my fingers involuntarily forced me to drop the blade. It clattered uselessly to the floor. Before I could even scream, he scooped me up, throwing me over his heavy shoulder and carrying me into the dark sleeping area. Why am I not passing out? I panicked, tears stinging my eyes, as he threw me violently onto the bed. The last sedative had knocked me out in seconds, but this one wasn't working fast enough. In one brutal move, Van ripped my linen dress down the middle, pinning my legs. I fought with everything I had, striking at his chest, kicking and twisting. But he was a mountain of muscle. He blanketed over me, pinning my arms until I couldn't move a single inch. Then came the blinding, agonizing pain. As the tears finally spilled over my cheeks, the edges of my vision began to go dark. The healer's delayed sedative finally dragging my conscious mind away as I began drifting off to sleep. In the morning, the air conditioning was the first thing to greet me, but the clinical chill didn't numb the deep, throbbing ache radiating through my body. The assault of last night rushed back into my mind in a sickening wave. Every muscle in my core resisted as I tried to shift on the bed, a sharp gasp of pain escaping my lips. I wasn't alone. "Shh. Do not try to move just yet, child," a soft, heavy voice whispered from the room. I flinched, pulling the torn furs tighter against my chest as I looked at the side of the bed. Bartar was sitting on a low stool right beside me. He looked as though he hadn't slept a wink. His white uniform was slightly ruffled, and his eyes were bloodshot, carrying a profound, crushing sorrow. He had been sitting there in the dark, patiently waiting for me to wake up. Seeing the raw terror in my eyes, he held his hands up in a gentle, non-threatening gesture. "You are safe right now. He is gone. The warlord is down at the staging bays, dealing with another major system failure on the launch pad." I swallowed hard, my throat feeling like sandpaper. Thanks to the linguistic lattice behind my ear, his words translated seamlessly into my mind, but hearing the mention of Van made my stomach turn. I closed my eyes as a tear slipped down my cheek, the physical and emotional pain completely overwhelming me. "I know you are hurting," Bata said softly. He reached over to a silver tray on the bedside table and picked up a small amber glass vial filled with a clear liquid, along with a clean cloth. The sedative I sent, it was all I could do on such short notice to try and spare your mind, he said as he gently poured a few drops of the liquid onto the cloth and offered me a small cup of clean water. This will ease the physical suffering. It is a powerful analgesic from my home. I promise you, it will help. Trembling, I managed to push myself up just enough to take the cup and swallow the medicine. Almost instantly, a soothing, cooling sensation began to spread through my chest, slowly dulling the sharp, agonizing ache in my lower body. But as the physical pain began to recede, the emotional dam completely broke. The realization of what had happened, the isolation of being trapped in the warlord's fortress, and the sheer exhaustion of fighting for my life caught up to me all at once. A heavy, broken sob tore from my throat. Bata didn't hesitate. Set down the tray, the old healer leaned forward and gently gathered me into his arms. I didn't pull away. I buried my face into the pristine white fabric of his sleeve, my shoulders shaking violently as I wept. He didn't offer empty words or tell me to be strong. He simply held me tightly, rocking slightly, acting as a shield against the cold, terrifying world outside the door. For the first time since I had been brought to this command ship, I felt a shred of genuine human comfort. As I cried into his arms, the heavy medication he had given me began to take hold. My tear-stained eyelids grew heavy, and the room began to soften around the edges. The fierce, protective embrace of the old healer was the last thing I felt before the deep, dreamless sleep dragged me back under, letting me escape the nightmare for just a little longer.